Hello, I'm Jan Szrawiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express. As always, I hope you enjoy the journey. On this episode, we turn our attention to a relatively little-known yet influential group that's managed to become a thorn in Russia's side, an embarrassment for the Georgian dream government, and a target of Kremlin conspiracy theories. It's the Georgian Legion. For those unfamiliar, they are a volunteer military unit fighting alongside Ukraine against Russia since 2014. Ever since they arrived in Ukraine, they've managed to earn a reputation for being fiercely committed fighters. So what motivates the group to fight the Russian invasion outside of their own country's borders? Let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
This is the Georgian Legion. It is perhaps the most iconic and most identifiable force fighting alongside the Ukrainian army in the defense of their independence. The unit was formed in 2014 by former Georgian soldier Mamuka Mamulashvili, when the conflict known as the Donbass War started. Over the next few years, the Legion's soldiers became renowned for their resilient combat style.
We have a very big family history fighting against Russian aggression. I mean, my family. Most of my ancestors died fighting Russia.
While the Legion is primarily made up of Georgian nationals, it also includes foreign volunteers. Each and every one of them is aware of the price that they might have to pay to defend Ukraine and oppose Russian imperialism and aggression.
If you come, it's a commitment. For example, my brother keeps sending me messages saying, "You can back out." And I tell him, no, if I commit here, it's either victory or nothing.
The Georgian Legion has taken part in many battles across their years of service in Ukraine. One of the most iconic was the battle for Hostomel Airport, which many observers say may have changed the outcome of the war. If Russia had succeeded in capturing this airport, then maybe the war would have ended in a few days, like Moscow had wanted.
And now we're zoning in on the East-splaining portion of our show. One of the most prominent figures fighting Russian imperialism and aggression is Mamuka Mamulashvili. Let's take a closer look at the story of this Georgian military leader who's currently in charge of the Georgian Legion fighting for Ukraine's freedom.
Many people have dedicated themselves to defeating Russia wherever it lays its greedy paws. Not many, however, are as efficient at this task as Mamulashvili. He was born in April in 1978 in Tbilisi to a Georgian military commander during the 1992 to 1993 Abkhazia War. At the age of just 14, he fought alongside his father in the conflict. Later, during the First Chechen War, Mamulashvili volunteered to fight against invading Russian forces. This would already be an impressive resume for a fighter, but Mamulashvili's career did not end there. When Russian forces invaded Georgia in 2008, he joined the Georgian military to fight the Russians off in the Russo-Georgian War. In the wake of Russia's aggression against Ukraine in 2014 and the annexation of Crimea, he formed the Georgian Legion, a unit of Georgian volunteers who fought alongside the Ukrainians in the Donbass War. When the worst came to pass and Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the Georgian Legion and Mamulashvili were there to oppose them. One of the most pivotal battles they fought in was the Battle of the Hostomel Airport in the very first days of the war. They have been fighting the Russians ever since.
And now, as always, it's time to take a look at the issue in greater detail. Let's begin with Mamuka Mamulashvili, the Legion's charismatic leader who has survived a Russian attempt at poisoning him. But assassination plots aside, the Legion also faces accusations of terrorism from Moscow. Now, Russia branding adversaries terrorists isn't exactly new. It's essentially their version of saying, hey, you hurt our feelings. Meanwhile, the Georgian dream government back at home is evidently more sympathetic towards Moscow than the Legion, officially putting about 300 of its fighters on a wanted list. The Georgian Security Service has gone even further than that, investigating fighters who return home from Ukraine, because apparently risking your life against Russian aggression abroad isn't patriotic enough. Now you have to pass loyalty tests back home. Things got even stranger when protests erupted in Slovakia, with authorities claiming that the Georgian Legion is somehow destabilizing Eastern Europe. Slovakia got sucked into this drama presumably because the Kremlin ran out of new accusations and started pulling countries out of a hat. Slovakia's involvement is mostly thanks to a wave of Russian disinformation, which has effectively transformed a group of Georgian volunteers into geopolitical boogeymen. I'm just waiting for Russia to blame the Legion for rising prices of eggs next. Yet beneath this absurd, there lies a serious issue. The Georgian Legion has become a lightning rod because it symbolizes everything Russia hates: independent action, resistance, and solidarity with Ukraine. For Putin, nothing's worse than former Soviet republics actually banding together, except perhaps people turning against his regime domestically. The Legion represents something deeper for Georgia, a nation torn between its pro-European aspirations and its government's cautious appeasement of Russia. The Legion's predicament is emblematic of broader tensions across Eastern Europe. It's about nations grappling with sovereignty, allegiance, and identity in the shadow of Russian imperialism. One thing remains clear: their existence alone is a daily reminder to Russia that aggression has consequences, and these consequences may often actually be reflected in the situation on the battlefield itself. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Mamuka Mamulashvili, commander of the Georgian Legion. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Thank you. Hello, thank you for inviting me.
So let's get this straight. Russia really doesn't like the Georgian Legion, apparently, judging by all the activities and all the strategies that it is employing against it, right?
Yes, actually, Russia is fighting us since we came to Ukraine, since 2014. So they're organizing documentaries against Georgian Legion. They are doing provocations. They are organizing campaigns against Georgian Legion. So actually, it's all natural, you know, because we're fighting Russia for quite a long time, and of course, we're one of the worst enemies for Russia.
So let's list the methods that they actually used recently. Disinformation campaigns, you've mentioned, assassination attempts, including multiple attempts against yourself. And also, apparently, the Russians are trying to mix up the Georgian Legion in the politics of countries that are fairly beyond the scope of what Georgian Legion is really about, such as Slovakia, of all places.
Yes, unfortunately, there were several campaigns against Georgian Legion, disinformation campaigns. One of them was against our social media, and they were quite successful deceiving Western society, and they're regularly doing that. So the campaign started right before the elections of the President of the United States, and it went for about several months. And in a campaign took part citizens of European countries, of NATO countries, unfortunately, of US and others. So actually, you know, the Western society is not ready, is not vaccinated for Russian disinformation campaigns. If former Soviet republics are more or less ready to greet Russian disinformation, Western society is totally unprotected. About Slovakian Prime Minister, pro-Russian Prime Minister of Slovakia, you know, it was one more try on a political level to discredit us, to make us terrorists, or to make us, you know, guys who are doing coups in European Union countries. So, you know, it is common methods of Russian propaganda, you know, to discredit you and then to physically liquidate you. So we are used to it, and we know how they work, and we know their methods.
Because it's really interesting to actually see how did this come about. The Georgian Legion, so far as I remember, is not an organization that's overtly political, right? You're a fighting force. You're fighting alongside Ukrainians for their freedom. Has anything changed? Has the Georgian Legion been engaging in any sort of politics in any country whatsoever during the last couple of years?
The Legion is not engaged in politics in our own country. In Georgia, of course, we support people in Georgia. We support the will of Georgian society to be free. And unfortunately, Georgia also has a pro-Russian government. But we never get involved in such actions, and we never get involved in politics in in Georgia or in any other country in the world. The point is that Georgian Legion is the largest volunteer international for information in Ukraine. And we get quite a lot of trouble to Russian forces on a battlefield. That's why we are a target of Russian interest, and they're always trying to discredit us or to kill us and do different campaigns against Georgian Legion. Except that Georgian Legion has not only militarily influence, it also has a symbolical role in the Ukrainian army as international support for Ukraine. That's why we are getting a target for Russia all the time.
And speaking of the situation in Georgia, you've mentioned that you're not getting involved in the domestic politics of Georgia. But the problem seems to be that the Georgian government actually doesn't appreciate the fact that you have your own views, you fight for Ukraine's freedom, and of course that you dare to oppose Russia. Being a pro-Russian government, they actually started to investigate members of the Legion coming back home. So doesn't this feel like a sort of exile, that you're in Ukraine right now, you went there of your own volition, but now it's becoming more difficult to return home if any of the fighters want to return, because they might be facing persecution from their own government?
Actually, it's not difficult to return home. It's impossible to return home because fighters of Georgian Legion are facing different problems. It's, fighting a full-scale war against Russia, and unfortunately, our families are fighting in Georgia for survival because they are pressed by Georgian government, and unfortunately, this political influence spreads on our families. The influence spreads, pro-Russian influence spreads on our family members that are actually are not in a good condition in Georgia. And also our fighters are under investigation, of course, because we are supporting Ukraine 11 years here in Ukraine, and we're totally unacceptable for pro-Russian government of Georgia. And whatever they are doing, it's what Russia actually tells them to do. So our families are not safe. We cannot go back home, and we are here for 11 years, just doing a job for Ukraine and for Georgia and for European countries, who want to live in democracy and who does not want the quality of democracy to be lower.
How do you feel about the support from the West? Because apart from what you've mentioned, the political persecution back in Georgia, Russia trying to portray you as terrorists, well, at the same time, Russia itself is using terrorist methods against civilians in Ukraine all the time. So there is hypocrisy, obviously. But also you have the increasingly complex situation when it comes to international support for Ukraine. You have the policy adjustments by the new US administration. You have European countries discussing where to go next. Countries like the aforementioned Slovakia or Hungary actually going against the grain and not willing to support Ukraine anymore. So would you say that the situation is becoming more and more difficult for organizations such as the Georgian Legion, which to a large extent rely on the presence of allies abroad with donations and with military support?
Of course, it's getting, more and more difficult for us, and unfortunately, not the weak support of United States is already seen on the front lines. And I just want every politician, Western politician, to know that each word said by them can kill Ukrainian, can take Ukrainian lives. And when they don't support or they hesitate to support Ukraine, we feel it right on the front line every day. And they have to be more responsible, saying something about countries that is in a full-scale war. So I appeal to all the politicians, to be more, cognitive to what's going on in Ukraine, and to be more supportive, because it's not a fight only for Ukraine. And we Georgians do understand that. That's why we're here. And we need your support. European countries are becoming more active now after US support became mild. So I hope that European countries will be more helpful than at the beginning of the full-scale war, and we will get more support.
And looking at the situation from a broader perspective, while at the same time not getting too involved in politics, because I'm quite sure you wouldn't really want that. But when you're looking at the efforts at maintaining or at obtaining a lasting peace in Ukraine, regardless what we think about these efforts, on the other hand, we have a guy who was educated by the KGB, who has spent years repressing his own people. Do you think there is a risk that he might simply be playing Western politicians using the same tools that you've already mentioned, disinformation against which we're not really inoculated against, like countries in Central and Eastern Europe? We, meaning, of course, the collective West. Do you think there is a risk that people might be falling for Putin's game?
Unfortunately, they are already falling for Putin's game, and Putin is very good at deceiving Western society, as I mentioned. Not only on Georgian Legion level, on high political level, he is very good at that, and Russian propagandistic machine is still the best in the world, and they can manipulate Western society also. Whatever we see is, Putin playing a big game, and Putin has cards. As we all see. So with those cards, he's trying to show Western society right now that he is doing very good at Ukrainian front lines, but they are not. They lost a million soldiers on Ukrainian soil. So they're manipulating that they're winning this war. They're trying to make a visibility that they're winning this war. And they're daily doing terroristic acts in Ukraine. They're daily killing civilians in Ukraine. So, I think Europeans should be more united right now, because we don't see much support from the United States after the new administration, and we need Europe to be more united for Ukraine.
What do you think is Putin's final objective for Ukraine? Is he going to stop, even if he annexes the regions that he physically, though illegally, controls? Or does he have a grander design for Ukraine and beyond?
I'm pretty sure he has more plans about European countries. Countries like Slovakia, Hungary, that are the governments are pro-Russian. Quite possibly he will be trying to occupy them if he will occupy Ukraine. So, Europe has to be, aware of politics that Putin is going to do if Ukraine fails. So, I appeal to all Europeans, just unite and support Ukraine, guys. It's right time to support Ukraine right now.
So finally, what do you think Putin is going to do next? Does he have the temerity to face NATO head-on? Or is it more likely that he's going to use underhand tactics, trying to interfere with elections, subvert the operations of his rivals, and use, of course, disinformation in order to get his way?
Actually, let's take the example of Georgia. Putin tried to occupy physically Georgia in 2008, and he could not do that. But he could buy Georgian government. He can manipulate with Georgian government and further spread the propaganda of so-called Russian world. That's what he's going to do in other countries, and that's how he's going to act. Georgia is an example, one of the first countries who Russia invaded after the collapse of Soviet Union. So we can use it quite as an example. And unfortunately, the position of Georgia is very weak, and that's what's going to happen generally, in other countries. That's what might happen in Ukraine, and that's why, I appeal for all countries to support Ukraine.
Mamuka Mamulashvili, commander of the Georgian Legion, was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And now we move on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth will not be attending the upcoming Ramstein format meeting. This is the first time that the US Defense Secretary will not be taking part in the summit of Ukraine's allies.
The United States' rift with Europe and Ukraine seems to be growing. Ever since the Ramstein format was founded in 2022, the head of the Pentagon has attended every summit. The meeting on April 11th, co-chaired by the United Kingdom and Germany, is setting up to be the first in which the US Secretary of Defense will not take part. The format itself was launched by Defense Secretary Hegseth's predecessor, Lloyd Austin, to coordinate the aid and assistance of Kiev's allies. US sources have also said that Hegseth is not expected to join the summit even in an online capacity, and that the Pentagon will most likely not send any senior representatives in his stead. Since his return to office in January, Donald Trump has been scaling down not just US aid for Ukraine, but also his country's presence in many pro-Ukrainian initiatives.
Russia's revenues from oil and gas fell by 17% year-on-year in March. These two resources are some of the most important products that Russia exports to fuel its economy and political position.
Russia's finance ministry said that the country's budget revenue from oil and gas amounted to $12.8 billion. This means that the government collected about $2.7 billion less in that month in levies than it did in March 2024. This drop, observers say, stems from the forced discounts on Russian oil, combined with tougher US sanctions and a sharp appreciation of the ruble. For example, a barrel of Russian crude oil trades below $60, far under the $70 that were assumed in the Russian budget. What's more, this is the second consecutive month in which the Russian finance ministry recorded an almost 20% drop in raw material revenue. Analysts say that if oil prices continue to be low, then the Russian government may be forced to slash expenditures to maintain any sort of fiscal stability.
Estonia plans to build 600 bunkers along its border with Russia. These fortifications have reportedly been tested during the war in Ukraine and can withstand direct hits from 152mm artillery shells.
Since the start of 2025, Estonia has been drawing up serious plans to greatly enhance its defense on the border with Russia. Tallinn, along with the other Baltic states, has warned that Russian ambition extends beyond just a war in Ukraine, especially concerning countries which used to be Soviet republics. The first batch of Estonian bunkers, 14 in total, is expected to be completed by fall this year in the country's northeast. An additional 4 will be built in the southeast. These fortifications will be built on state-owned and private land. During the next few months, the Estonian military will be choosing the appropriate bunker design. 2 in particular were tested in 2024, and this process reportedly incorporated lessons and data from the ongoing war in Ukraine. The defense plan also includes various anti-tank barriers and fortified firing positions. Some of the planned elements will only be deployed in the defense zone in the case of a serious crisis.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates.